Okay, I'm going to start because it's 12:30 and we've got masses to fit in, and you've all got other places to be when you've finished here, and I've got to be 20 minutes walk away in 15 minutes when I finish here to do another one. So I will start. My name's Ed Baker. Thank you for coming to this session. Anybody here yesterday on the 740? Cool. I didn't scare you off that much then. That's good. I start this off normally with just a few show of hands to see what type of audience I've got, which is always interesting. Anybody certified in the room? Good. Anybody certified on server previous to this one in the room? Okay, which is more hands than were certified. Okay, right. I said my name's Ed Baker. I'm a certified trainer. I've been a trainer for about 10, 12 years. I'm an enterprise mobility MVP, but I also work, I used to work for Microsoft, now I work as a contractor for Microsoft in the UK, and I'm server guy at Microsoft.com. So if you have any questions about server licensing, server anything, it's supposed to be for the UK, bash me an email, I'll try and get an answer out to you. If I don't know what the answer is, I can normally find somebody that can get you the answer. Let's move on and have a look. So, you're all thinking about taking 741, which is the networking exam, which is part of the Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate. 3 exams involved in that, unless you have a previous one at Server 2012, in which case you need the 743. 743 has bits of all of the exams in it, so you're just as useful in here. There are 5-day courses for each of these exams if you want to do proper training, instructor-led training. There are also, you can buy now, video training, so mock on demand. You can buy training and have 90 or 180 days to watch an instructor instruct the course on video. Lots of options for you. I'm going to probably ask you to wait till the end for questions unless there's anything really burning that I've said that you think's wrong, which is possible, or that you don't understand, which again is possible. Please go to a microphone if you have a question so that this is recorded, so that everybody can hear it and I don't have to, I'm deaf and old, and I would have to then try and repeat what you said. So to make sure you ask the right question. There may well be time at the end for questions if I get it done in time. The deck has hundreds of slides. You're not going to see hundreds of slides because you cannot fit that amount in and make sense of it in 1 hour and 50, 1 hour and 10 minutes. But the point is the deck has useful information for you, and when it gets uploaded, you can download it and you can follow that information and study for yourself. So this is a mixture between preparing you to take the exam here if you're nearly ready, to give you some guides and tips, and also I want you to take away links, resources and material to be able to study in the future, and I want to break down the topics and questions. I can only cover some of them. They're all in here, but I can only cover some of them. So if you think I'm flipping through, they're still in the deck. I'm going to stick to the things that I think are relevant to you guys for tricky questions or questions that people normally struggle with. All of Microsoft's certification exams are broken down into something called an objective domain. That's a number of areas of functional topics that you're questioned on. In this exam you have 6, and when you take the exam at the end of it, you will get little bar charts of each one of these objective domains to say how well or badly you did in each area as a useful test if you need to retake that exam. So we're going to cover all of these to a lesser or greater degree. If you're not understanding what those terms are, then you've got a lot of study to do. You're not in the wrong place, but you've got a lot of study to do, and I'm probably going to be saying things you don't understand today. First section, we're going to cover domain name system. This is a real goodie for command line questions. Everybody can point and click a GUI, but there's lots of different ways of command lining the DNS. PowerShell, obviously, because PowerShell is awesome and everybody uses PowerShell. DNS command is still there. It's still tricky. It's still got lots and lots and lots of parameters that you need to understand. So my advice to you for all of these things is to go to the objective domain, look at one objective, which might be install DNS server. Find the way you can do that in every method. Install it with PowerShell. Install it with the GUI. Configure it with PowerShell and configure it with the GUI so that when you get a question, you can focus your mind on, I now know which way it can be done. How does this question apply to me? It's as much understanding the question as it is understanding whether you know what the answer is before you get there. So in the DNS, install and configure, we've got what the requirements are. We have Nano Server, and I'll cry a little tear here because as of October you won't be able to do this because Nano Server is about to stop being an infrastructure server. there will still be some questions in the exam for a short period of time. So you do need to understand how to install NanoServer as DNS, which we went through yesterday. How you install DNS. What are forwarders? What are route hints? Delegation of DNS zones. Whole section of questions on that. Let's have a look at some. We go even further. Response rate limiting. There's an awful lot of focus nowadays on denial of service, distributed denial of service type attacks. Lots of questions are likely to be in there about how you can secure your DNS. Not only DNSSEC, you've got new features like response rate limiting. Here's your NanoServer options. There are several different ways of putting DNS into a NanoServer. When you build the NanoServer, it's space at the front, sir. Space at the front. When you build the NanoServer VHD at the beginning, you can add the package at that time using PowerShell. If you've already built your VHD, you can use Install Windows feature and add the DNS feature inside the NanoServer. You can use DISM to add it as well. Enable Windows optional feature is the other way. All NanoServer management is designed to be remote. It's not only remote by PowerShell, it can be remote by GUI as well. If you've got the RSAT tools installed, remote server admin tools, you can use DNS Manager direct onto the Nano DNS server. It's only the installation that's any different. DNS security. For my sins, I wrote a book on this once. DNS security is a long and tortuous path to get down. Understand DNSSEC. Understand what it means, how it works, what you have to do to secure the zone. New feature, DANE. Tells your record, tells your DNS which certificate authority it is to expect to provide the certificates for it, which prevents you having random CAs affect your DNS server. DNS socket pool, if you're worried about people understanding where it's coming from, you can randomize the sockets, the addresses and the sockets that are used by the server. From Windows Server 2012, this was enabled by default. And of course, cache locking. Stop it being overwritten until a particular period of your TTL has expired, which you can set. Terms that will be asked. As an example, you might get a question about securing the zone, and immediately you think that's DNSSEC. But actually, that's overkill for 80% of the things you would want to do. So make sure you've read the question properly, and make sure you understand which one of these might apply in those circumstances. Often when you study, you go through something and think, oh, I understand that really well now. And that's the one that you will then give as the answer because you understand it right down. You know it will do the job. Is it the best way of doing it? Luckily, in this exam, you will not get what is the best answer. Often in the MCSE exams, there's what's the best answer, and then you've got 2 or 3 maybe right, and you have to work out what the examiner, what the question writer was thinking is the best one and why. Those are quite difficult. Not in this exam. Zones. Understand the difference between a primary zone, a secondary zone, and an Active Directory integrated zone. Understand what it means to have a primary zone. How do you secure that zone? How do you stop people stealing the records from that zone? Stub zones. When, why, how, and what. What is a stub zone for? What does it do? Know all of the records. What are they? What's an SRV record? Most people know an SRV record because a domain controller has an SRV record. There are lots of other types of SRV records. You rarely use them, but there are lots of other types. So if you see an SRV record questioning, oh, that's domain control. It might not be. It could be another type of SRV record for a different service in your network. And the difference between aging and scavenging of records and zones. That is hit regularly and hard. And then how we configure these things. Go through, create a zone, and go through every tab and every option in the GUI. And then if you can face it, look at the DNS commandlets and understand how you could do the same thing using that commandlet. Understanding what a parameter, because the parameters won't necessarily be called the same thing in DNS commandlets as they are in the GUI. That'd be far too simple, wouldn't it? Really important terminology, really important terminology. What does DNS do for a start? It's hostname resolution, which is cool. What's the difference between a forward and reverse lookup? Everybody knows about forward lookup because when you create a DNS zone, you get a forward lookup zone. Reverse is empty. What does it do? The types, I've said that, types, primary, secondary, ADI, and stub zones. And these wonderful things that appear when you have an Active Directory integrated zone. The domain partitions, the forest DNS zone and the domain DNS zone. I've given you a little hint there. What do they do? It's all about where it's replicated within your Active Directory. What's the start of authority record? Name servers, CNAMEs, pointers. I know I pressed it. Stub zones. Anybody use stub zones? So there's 2 of you use them. Anybody not use them? 3 of you. Anybody not use them but understand what they do and why they're there? So of 150 people, we've got 3 or 4 that actually use them. I guarantee the number of questions that might relate to stub zones is more than that percentage. So if you don't use them, understand why you might use them. So a stub zone, if the DNS servers change regularly, you would use a stub zone because it will keep records of those glue records, those name servers, it would keep them. Stub zone always has a start of authority record, so it knows where it gets to, and it has very few other records. So if you're worried about zone transfers and traffic of DNS across your network, a stub zone's a good zone to use because it minimizes the zone transfer traffic. Yet the name servers are always updated. Don't cover anything else on that. Conditional forwarders. Also misunderstood quite often. People understand forwarders and think, well, that's everything. Everything goes over there. Everybody's going to carry out my DNS recursion or my DNS searches on that forwarder. Conditional forwarder might be used if you have another part of your organization that has recently joined and they've got their own DNS records and you don't want to have to go up and down and out and back. You go direct to that forwarder to get records from that zone for which they are authoritative of. Make sure if you put a forwarder in, they are authoritative for that zone. They own that zone. Yep. Yes. AA is an IP version 6 record. IP version 6 is figuring a great deal more in all exams that to do with networking nowadays. You will also get IP version 4 questions. If you're really unlucky, you could always get an IP version 6 subnetting question. Really unlucky. Shouldn't, but you might. They're not all easy questions. How many hosts do I need in a /24, all that sort of stuff. But you will get subnetting questions, which is an interesting, this is one exam. I've taken my last 10 exams remotely at home. You have no piece of paper, so you're doing subnetting on your fingers. I won't do that again. Zone scavenging and zone aging. Scavenging and aging are created and configured at different locations within your environment, within the infrastructure. You must enable it at both server and zone level. You will get questions about troubleshooting that will ask you what you do and how you do it and where would you go to do this, and choose all. And there might be 3 or 4 things in there and you might actually have to choose 3 of them because you do the server level, you do the zone level, and then you have to enable it at resource record level for it to be scavenged. It is already enabled by default, but in a troubleshooting question, somebody may possibly have disabled it on that record. That's something to look for. And remember, of course, if you've got a static record doesn't have a TTL, doesn't have a time to live, it won't expire, therefore scavenging will do nothing to it whatsoever. It's a static record, it won't disappear. So DNS, put some nice IP addresses in there because you could potentially in this area get some DNS IP questions because you need to understand about subnetting and networking to understand where it appears. In IP version 6, just understand what the beginning bit of the IP address is for those types, whether they're global, local, link local, whether it's FE80, what type of IP address can actually get on the internet with IP version 6. Now, even though I love PowerShell, and PowerShell's fantastic and it's used for everything, it's only in the DNS area one method of setting your DNS records, setting your server. DNS command and GUI are also tested. Okay, it's your turn now. I'll read it out because it's a lot there. You are sysadmin for Tailspin Toys. You administer the Active Directory along with DNS. Another administrator added a new DNS record. It's an A record. So it's a resource record for a single device. For www.tailspintoys, that should be toys, apologies, .com. The record points to 10.10.5.254. Forward name resolution is fully functional. However, the web administrators are reporting that 10.10.5.254 is not resolving to the correct address. The typo there is not anything to do with the right answer of the question, sorry. You need to ensure, I checked that this morning, you need to ensure that 10.10.5.254 resolves to www.tailspintoys.com. Do you want to add a second address? Point it to it. Do you want to add a AA second address and point it there? Add a pointer record for Tailspin Toys and point it to 10.10, or add a pointer record for 10.10 and point it to Tailspin Toys? A, B, C, or D? D. Consensus is D? Good. We understand reverse and pointers. So for those that don't, forward lookup, you give it a name, it finds the IP. Reverse lookup, you give it the IP, it finds the name. Dead simple. DHCP. Again, install, configure, authorize. Regular. Make sure that the DHCP server is authorized in Active Directory. If it's not authorized in Active Directory, it ain't going to do anything at all. Scopes. Understand scopes, understand super scopes and multicast scopes. Server 2012 brought out the failover. R2 actually brought out the failover. So you can have, instead of split your scopes, you can now have failover of DHCP servers. What are reservations? What are all the options? Some of them are really weird, deep, unusual options, and I wouldn't recommend you go through every DHCP option because there are hundreds. Just know the more common ones, like what's Maruta, my domain prefix, that sort of stuff. And then configure policies, which is a fairly new thing as well. The options for client and server for Pixie Boot, know those numbers because they come up fairly regularly, or used to. Relay agents, when would you need it, what would you use it for, and how does it work? Pray that you don't get the implement IP6 addressing using DHCP version 6. Is anybody in the room actually happy with IP version 6, that they really know it and understand it yet? It's one of those, till we turn off 4, nobody's going to learn 6. Yeah. Export and import of a DHCP server. At that point, never turn 6 off on a Windows network, please. It's the primary IP scheme for Windows and Windows Server. And server migration. This looks silly, but really, really important. Quite a few questions are graphical. And you might get a question that contains one of these images, and that is the only pointer to what the answer might be. So you've done this with a scope, you've added this, you've enabled the scope, you've authorized the server, everything's running beautifully, and it stops working, what do you go and do? And you see a graphic. This is what the DHCP server manager has. And you go around looking at all the things in the DHCP server, and you forget that those little graphics actually tell you exactly what's wrong. And the same with the scopes. Know the difference between inactive, warning, and alert. Understand what a superscope does, how you create it. Understand you need extra address space to create a superscope. You can't just magic it out of the air. If you don't have an address space to use, you can't just go, oh, I'm going to extend that. If you don't own that address space, you can't use it as a scope. When would you use a superscope? You'd use that when you are running out of address spaces. So if you've got two 24/24 Class C networks, you can add them together and create a super scope as long as you have privileges and administer both. DHCP version 6, no difference between stateful and stateless config. And high availability. Stick it in the cluster role or use the new availability failover for DHCP. There are two types. You can still create it in failover. Understand the lease periods. Often you might get a question about mobile users running out of addresses. Perfect answer to that could be shorten the lease scope. Scope, lease period even. If you've got 100 addresses, you've got 150 users regularly coming in and out, but they're only there for an hour, crunch it back down to an hour and it'll be fine. DHCP, even put the graphic in there because they are used quite a lot. Not to confuse you, but so you understand what they each mean. And again, PowerShell is only one of the options. Understand backup users, backing up your DHCP scopes and importing them and moving them, and backing up the servers and importing them and moving them. How do you migrate one server to another? You're retiring a DHCP server, you create a new one. Well, how do you get that DHCP server's information into the other DHCP server? You are the system administrator for Fabrikam. You've got a main office, a single DHCP server, and a single DHCP scope. You need to configure DHCP for high availability. So that question tells me I have nothing else available. I have no other options to answer this question. It doesn't say, here's a table with 5 other servers you could potentially use to help you out. So there can't be many options in that answer. What should you do? I just told you haven't got one of those. You haven't got any more servers to play with. This question actually could cause some arguments. So to me, because the question hasn't given me enough information to answer that, I don't know I've got a new server. I don't know I can do that. If I got that, I would leave a comment. But of those answers there, network affinity is not going to work, and network load balancing is not going to work. We've already got the DHCP role on the one server. So all it's saying is add a server, add the DHCP role, add them both to a cluster and turn it into a failover cluster, which if you look at the question itself, I wouldn't be happy with that. I'd want more information in my question.
Who would you complain to?
You're just right. You'd leave a comment. You would leave a comment.
If you selected E for deploying a new server and then also selected F for adding the DHCP role on that new server,
it would be so the question there was if you selected E and F, deploy a server, add a role, that's great, but it doesn't make it highly available. You have to do the other two things as well to make it highly available. You would be able to have a split scope, which isn't real high availability. You'd have 80% one place and 20 another, which is just good practice. Sir?
How would that score if you got half the answer?
So scoring is changing quite a bit. Sometimes you can get lots of points in one question. This is and it will tell you in the question, it will say, each answer presents a full solution or each answer presents part of a solution. If it's part of a solution, that's 4 things for 1 point. Often, if it's each answer presents a full solution and there's 2 of them, you might get 2 points. However, the points are irrelevant because 700 is passing and you have no idea how many you've scored because some exams are harder than others, in which case the score to get 700 is less. It's all standardized and I really don't understand how they do that. And the lady that explains it really well, and I still don't understand how they do Okay, IPAM. This was a major new feature in Windows Server 2012. There have been some changes, like we've now got multi-forest, multi-AD forests in this. It's actually quite complicated to deploy and use because most of it is done from the server manager and it's got these buttons at the top and you follow the path. Do it 2 or 3 times. Build yourself some VMs, do it 2 or 3 times. If you haven't got that feature or facility, get onto TechNet Virtual Labs. And in TechNet Virtual Labs, you can look for servers. There isn't a Server 16 IPAM, but there is a Server 12 IPAM. And there's lots and lots of hour and 2-hour-long labs for you to be able to try all of this stuff out. And you can just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. If you have got the infrastructure and you can build VMs, fill your boots. So IPAM, IP address management. It doesn't only do that. It does all sorts of clever stuff. You provision it either manually. Don't do that. There might be a question about it, but provisioning IPAM manually is a long, laborious process when provisioning it through group policy is really, really, really easy. But you might get a question about what the difference is, so learn the differences. Once you've provisioned it, you then have to do a server discovery. Which servers are available to me to put into my IPAM database? And then which IP addresses and IP ranges am I going to manage within IPAM? And then I can monitor utilization of IP address and DNS usage within my zones and scopes. There are 2 options. A centralized system with one database, one IPAM server for everything, or a decentralized system where you have one at the top and then IPAM servers for each site. The databases don't talk to each other. So if you have multiple people who support and manage multiple areas, but not everybody manages everything, it's a good idea to have site A has manager A and he has one IPAM implementation because he manages all of that. Or you have to use role-based, put it up at the top and use role-based access for your whole environment. It's a design decision at the beginning and it's your choice. And of course, IPAM still only recognizes Microsoft DNS servers and Microsoft DHCP servers. So if you have any third-party solutions in this, it's no good to you. But it will stop you using bits of paper and spreadsheets to manage your scopes and addressing. Interestingly here, this is one of the few areas in the objective domain where virtual machine manager is mentioned. This exam doesn't have questions about virtual machine manager because it's an MCSA exam, but it's mentioned in the objective domain. So do some research on how you would implement IPAM connecting to virtual machine manager. So IPAM, built-in inbox, it's a role, add it. It will manage all of your addresses, all of your domain names, and all of the device identities. Really tightly integrated to DNS and DHCP within Microsoft World. You can answer such things as, if you set it up correctly, how many addresses have I got left in this scope? When am I running out? And it will give you an alert and a warning. Where are these devices situated? If you've built it properly in your scopes and you've got the correct information in your DHCP servers as to where things are, you can actually identify by building by floor where these things are. It also gives a detailed auditing solution. IPAM questions, quite a lot of them, role-based access. How do you give people access to do this, this, and this, but not this? So understand the difference between a server administrator, an IPAM administrator, a DNS administrator within IPAM. So we have tracking and activity and utilization of all of your solutions, really granular role-based access, that's been improved as well, and you can delegate administration amongst your DHCP administrators. You can stick it, you can do it in Windows internal database, or you can stick it into a big SQL Server database if you want. And it will automatically discover and it will automatically discover all of your DHCP and DNS servers. You then have to choose which ones you add for management. So you can just pick and choose in your environment which ones you want. screen's just gone nuts. So, configuring IPAM. What do you need to do it? What machines? Remember, you can configure an IPAM server if it is a domain joined member. You cannot configure an IPAM server on a domain controller. If you do install an IPAM server on a DHCP server, which is quite legitimate, it won't discover any DHCP servers. There's your trivia. If it's on a DHCP server, which is acceptable, it won't discover, it'll do DNS, but it won't do DHCP. Got your three methods, distributed, centralized, and hybrid. And remember, the databases are not shared between the servers. So when you get a question in IPAM that says, you've done this, this, and this, and it assumes as part of the question that you can communicate between the databases, that doesn't happen. Remember that when you discover the servers, which is all DNS and all DHCP, you don't automatically manage them. Having discovered them, you then choose to manage the ones you want. Can be done in PowerShell, can be done in the GUI in Server Manager. Have a look at what's new. One of my favorite things whenever they bring a technical preview or a new product out, I just type the product name, what's new in the product, and it brings me a list. And hopefully under docs.microsoft.com, which is now pretty awesome, all of Microsoft documentation is now in docs.microsoft.com, and it's hosted on GitHub, which means when you find an error and you comment on it, normally within 24 hours that error is corrected. And that never used to happen with the documentation. It was there for pretty much ever. So the documentation now is extremely good. Go to docs.microsoft.com, search for Windows Server. Look for what's new, and it will be linked and linked and linked to the areas you want. In Windows Server, it's slightly less relevant, the date of the post. Obviously, in any cloud solutions, it's extremely relevant, the date of the post within docs.com. Network connectivity and remote access. Implement network address translation and configure routing. There is a new routing protocol in Windows Server 2016. Does anybody know what it is? It's BGP. Windows Server 2008 had quite a few protocols in, and then they stripped a load out, and you were effectively left with one protocol. And now, because of the software-defined networking, they use BGP, so BGP is back in to allow you to communicate with other networks. So have a look at that. Network address translation is used a great deal in routing and remote access. It's also used a great deal in software-defined networking. Understand everything about network address translation in Windows Server, because some of it's fairly new, like the new NetNat object you can create. And if it's brand new and shiny, it's likely to get some questions. Understand how you create a site-to-site VPN solution and a point-to-site VPN solution. What options are there in protocols? You might get a question similar to what's the most secure way of connecting from outside into inside? Which protocols would you use? Which is normally a L2TP with IPsec. But there are other options now for various areas, such as if you want the new always-on VPN, there's a brand new always-on VPN, what's required at the client, which is something new and extra. You need a TPM for that. What authentication options do you have over and above MS Chap 2? If you've got smart cards, you need Microsoft PEAP, protected EAP protocols for your smart cards. VPN Reconnect still needs IKE version 2. That's walking around a building, the VPN disconnects, you can reconnect. You can set the timing for that. And your connection profiles. More still. Direct access. It's less complicated to do now. It's not uncomplicated. It is less complicated. Understand the requirements. You may not have the features and the infrastructure and the devices available to you to build your own direct access system, but make sure you follow them all the way through online. There are lots of steps. There's a good graphical run-through of direct access in a minute. So, Under the remote access role, there are lots of role services. And a lot of questions will ask you, you want to do this, which role should you install? And pretty much it's always the remote access role, even if you're not doing remote access, because underneath you've got things like direct access and VPN, and then you choose what to install, so don't get put off by that. You can do it with Add Windows feature. That does pretty much nothing. Once you've done that, it's there. You then have to run the wizard. Install or configure and enable routing and remote access wizard. Even for direct access, you have to run that. And for NAT, you need two interfaces, one inside, one outside, whichever solution you're building. Could be external, could be still internal to you if you're building a nested NAT. And you have to, as part of the wizard, allocate the correct network card, which is pointing at the correct network to the right internal or external net. So a question there could be, you've got two IP addresses, A and B, you're creating this, what do you have to do? And you'd get options for which IP address goes to which network card and which network card goes to the internal and external within routing and remote access. SSTP, very popular, only needs 443, so we don't have to open any extra firewall rules for it. In this part of the exam, you will absolutely need to know all of the ports that map to all of the protocols for all of your options. Another reason why perhaps this one isn't the best one to take at home, if you use the go in with a memory full of stuff and write down everything you can think of in the first 10 minutes of the exam, like your network. In Cisco, I used to do my network chart, and then I used to do all the protocols and get it all right, and then never get asked questions on any of them. But it's worth 10 minutes of a risk, isn't it? If you can get it out of your head, you don't then think about it during all the questions. Remote dial-in. Not many people do that anymore, but it's not only for dialing in, it's for VPN as well. Direct access. So direct access is enabled, it's always on once you've created it, and it's simply a solution for allowing the user to be either controlled. They may not know they've got direct access. You can use the administrative version where you can administer and update their machines without them actually having the access the other way, if you want to do that. If they're inside their network, the first thing they will do is look, for a network location server. If that network location server is there, it'll say you're inside the network. You don't need to use direct access. You're in there, and you already have access. You're authenticated, and you already have access to all of the internal resources and can connect through the connection security rules if you want to. And your NRPT, your resolution table, will tell you which DNS servers and which servers to use to connect to which things. However, if you're outside, the first thing you do is you look for the network location server, which is not there. Because it's not there, you assume you're outside the network. The flaw here is if your network location server's down and you are inside the network, there's a bit of an error there. It will then look at the NRPT, the resolution table, and say, okay, you're outside of the network. We are going to use direct access for this. Here is your DNS server for this. The NRPT also contains, if you've decided that when your users are outside your network, if you want them to use their internet connection for non-internal resources, that's where that is pointed as well. Whereas if you want them to use your network once they're on direct access for all network transactions, then you can point them that way as well using the NRPT table, which is configured through group policy. The DNS server points you to the direct access server, which of course is your remote server on the perimeter of your network, which then authenticates you through the domain controller and builds the infrastructure tunnel. The infrastructure tunnel is then created. This is the point at which you used to have two IP addresses. You now only need one because it's built into one tunnel, or two simultaneous tunnels. Once you have been authenticated, you then get your intranet tunnel that allows you to communicate with all your internal network resources. And when you type in well-known network names on your network, you automatically connect, direct access. The competitor to this is the always-on VPN, or the application-aware VPN. that it'll shut down when you're not using it, and then when you go to an application that requires the VPN, it will automatically fire back up and connect you straight back in. That's new. And in fact, in Microsoft's internal network, that's what they now use. So if you've got a remote machine, you don't go in through direct access, you go in through always on VPN. Direct access. It no longer requires private key infrastructure. You can use Kerberos proxy on HTTPS if you want to. It's much simpler to deploy now using the wizard. But if you use the wizard, some of the clever stuff like forced tunneling where you want people to go won't be there. You have to do that manually. You won't get NAP, the old network access protection tool. That won't be there either. That has to be done outside of the wizard. Or even the MFA, the two-factor authentication, won't happen through that. So if you just want a standard, simple direct access, you can use the wizard. Good question there. You want to deploy direct access using MFA, which are your answers? It's not going to be the wizard. And of course, everything in the direct access solution must be a member of the domain. So if we're implementing direct access for your client, you first of all create the security groups, then you create the group policies, and you can also do an offline domain join as well. Offline domain join, not normally in this exam, but offline domain join is a really popular question type solution because it's not done that much, but there's lots of features available in there. So Radius, Microsoft's network policy server, the MPS server, is Microsoft's Radius solution. You can configure it both as the Radius server or as a Radius proxy. We need to go in and look at how we configure our Radius clients, how we configure our NPS templates and our connection templates. And of course, Radius accounting. It's a certificate solution. We need our CRPs, our network policies, and our connection request policies. Understand which one does what. What does the CRP do? What does the network policy do? Where do you put them if you've got a distributed solution? If it's not all one machine, that's the Radius server, the MPS server that does everything, where does the CRP go and where does the network policy go? The settings for these, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them in multiple tabs in the configuration. Of course, it's not proper wizard, but in the wizard. You cannot hope to understand all of them. But if you go through what people normally do, and when you set this up 3 or 4 times, you will see the other options. Have an explore, have a look at them. Because you never know, it might come up that one of those options is the one you want. If you're going to use more than one server, so you need a Radius proxy and a Radius server, there are 5 elements to this. You've got your clients they're going to access, you've got the access servers, you've got the MPS servers, and you've got the NPS proxies, and then you need user accounts in a database, whether it be Active Directory or not. Just remember there are 5 parts. So if they're asking a question where there's definitely going to be more than one server in your remote access solution, there are 5 parts you need to think about. When you configure a Radius client, you must always, there are lots of optionals, but you must always have a shared secret. Why they call it shared secret, not password, I have no clue, but it's just normally a simple text thing that goes into each side of the equation. A friendly name, it must have that. And you don't have to have a fully qualified domain name. You could put an IP address in if you want to. The vendor info, that's all optional. Radius templates. There are fewer and fewer questions saying you need to do this with the least amount of administrative overhead, but they do scrape in there. And then you have a choice of, well, there's obviously 2 answers right here. Which one is going to mean I have to do less to achieve it? Radius templates aren't administratively quick. So that would be an option where you would choose not to do that. Radius accounting, remember how you can set it up, what you can log to. You can log to a SQL database file. You can log to a text file on your computer or on a remote computer. You can do them together. You can do them separately. If you do set up accounting and it fails, users can't get in. Because it's a security measure. It's saying, well, actually, I can't, you've told me you want to audit me, you've told me you want to make sure users tell me when they're, or I can connect when users are in. If the user cannot register its connection into the database, then it's not going to connect them. Look for troubleshooting questions on that. CRPs, connection request policies. Who can connect? Not what can they connect to, who can connect? When, why, how, where, what. Look at what they're connecting to. Network policies. Having gone through your connection request policy and said, yeah, you're in, what can you connect to? What can you do when you're in there? Default installation questions. When you create one of these servers, you get standard default network policies, which effectively block a great deal of things. It's best practice to create your new policies and delete the old ones. You can add to the old ones, but you don't have to. Popular questions around exporting. What's the format you export to? How do you deal with it? Can you alter them? How can you import them? What can you do with those? Obviously, it's XML. NAT has become a very big part of this. They've built in, because of the software-defined networking, NAT fits into this as part of routing and remote access as well. So understand what NAT is, network address translation, understand how you configure it and what it means. Connection request policies, network policies, big item as well. How you build them, where you move them to, what you do with them. This stuff you need to build a lab. Either you build a lab or you go onto TechNet and find out if they've got a lab. I don't know if they've got a TechNet lab for this one, but you'll be unlikely to get the knowledge you need and the hands-on experience without building a lab for this sort of stuff. And as it says, just play around. Core and distributed network solutions. So this is the one you'll get your subnet questions. We all good with subnetting? We all love IP addresses. I used to teach apprentices. It's simply doubling and halving. It really is doubling and halving. You just have to use lots of fingers, that's all. So you will get some sort of subnet questions. You will get some sort of IP version 6 questions. What's a link local? What's an internet IP address in version 6? That sort of stuff. And subnetting. You'll be unlucky if you get an IP6 subnetting question, but prepare for it. They're not that complicated, but you think they are. Stateless addressing, understand that. Quite a few options for interoperability between these things. There are numerous ways of communicating IP4 and IP6 for non-full IP6 networks. So you've got ISOTAP, you've got 6to4, you've got Teredo. They're all good for separate different things and have different infrastructure overheads. So the question would be A, and you'd have all of those in the answer, and then it's your choice to understand, well, I need an extra server for that, or this needs to be that. So you need to understand, just write a little list, what those things mean and what they are and when you would use them. And then the biggie, Border Gateway Protocol. Understand what it is, go and play with it, go and use it, look at the options for it. It's new and shiny. They will ask questions about it. I'll just leave that there a minute, because you're all going to hate it. It's free money, really. A subnetting question should be free money. It should. It isn't always the case, but it should be free money. So here's an example of your 6to4 ISOTAP and Teredo, just to help you out. There's a lot in docs.microsoft.com on this, a lot. DFS. You'll of course be glad to know that in October, RS3, the new server edition, the one that kills server management tools, kills Nano Server and a couple of other things, also kills SMB1. So in networking, SMB1 will be out and switched off. Hoorah! It means my QNAP doesn't work anymore, but it's off and gone. But it also completely removes any compatibility with FRS. Anybody remember FRS? I can see people that are old enough to remember FRS and the pain and the suffering. Okay, FRS is gone as of October. You will not get FRS questions, but you might get FRS in an answer because it still exists. After October, you shouldn't. So we're back with DFS. DFS is fast, it's cool, it's good, but it's got lots of different options. You've got DFS namespaces and you've got DFS replication. They're different things. You don't have to have both. Go and play with DFS. You don't need much infrastructure to be able to do with that. Understand replication, understand what RDC, remote differential compression, is and how it works and how it makes your transfers much quicker. Do you need to do staging? What benefit do you get from staging? Why would you use it? What is the use case? How do you clone a file system? How do you recover one, optimize them? And of course, branch cache has been around for a little while, but it will still get questioned. Understand the difference between hosted and distributed branch cache. The Windows as a Service solution, you know, you can choose where you get your updates from if you don't lock it down. So you can get, it's peer-to-peer stuff you can get from the internet or from my local network. This uses the same system as branch cache. It reserves a little piece of your system to send the updates to other people on your network. Same type of solution. So, standalone can scale a great deal more than domain-based namespaces. So standalone can have 50,000 folders, domain-based can have 5,000. You'll be unlucky if you get a question that distinguishes between them, but that is a number, it does exist, it's worth looking at. Communicate with the namespace server, you get a referral, you go to the file server. It's continuous replication. This one happens to be hub and spoke. They get the referral. I like the name actually, hub and smoke. I like that. That's quite a good name. And that namespace has been replicated to the remote file share. Go and have a look when you install these things, which machines you install the role service on. Where do you install the replication role service? Would this be a standalone? Several options there. Okay, it's been around since 2012. It's been updated in 2012 R2 and updated a tiny bit in 2016. PowerShell for DFS was put in 2012 R2. So that's going to be used a lot. Currently 20, I think it's more than 23 now, I think, for namespaces and 40 odd for replication. As I said, build things in the GUI. Once you've built it, go and work out how you can build exactly the same thing in a PowerShell command. Preceding, how do you do that? Why would you do it? What is the use case for preceding before you enable it? How would you do it? What solution would you use? This is dying. Again, there's IP4 and IP6 in this section. Anywhere in any of the objective domains that mentions IP4 and IP6, you could potentially get a question that involves subnetting. So understand it. We're talking networking. What underpins everything we're doing here? IP. If you don't understand it, you need to get a firm grip on that. DFS, know how to install it both for replication and for namespaces, both standalone and domain-based. Play with it, practice it, break it, fix it. There's a lot of troubleshooting in DFS. Question here. System admin, you have a main office and a branch office. The main office has a single file server. The branch office does not have a secure facility to house servers and has a high latency connection to the main office. You need to improve the performance when branch office users access documents from the file server. The reason I've separated the answers from the questions here is because I'm hoping that all of you in your head already would have an answer. So you're saying branch cache? So that's distributed mode, yeah? Branch cache is the answer. It's got to be distributed because you've got a high latency. You don't want to have to go to the hosted server and add a new place to house it. But if you know a little bit about something, 2 or 3 of those could be right. Advanced network infrastructure. This last section, I've left probably 10 minutes for this and a bit of questions at the end. This is the section, it's got more than it used to have in it in terms of content and also more in percentage towards the exam. So this is worth investing a lot of time in your studies. Because, not only because it's got a lot of questions, there's a whole load of new things in here. We've had NIC teaming for a while. We now have switch embedded teaming to help with software-defined networking. How do you create a switch embedded team? When would you do it and why would you do it? Well, you create it by using PowerShell, because of course you would. You can create a switch embedded team with no switches. You can add those afterwards. If you create a team with 2 switches without telling it it's embedded, it creates a switch embedded team. And the reason we've got switch embedded teaming is because when you're using software-defined networking, you want to move your VMs around. You don't want to have the credentials to get into the VMs to start messing about with the networking inside the VM. You want to mess around with the networking at the host level because you are a domain administrator and you've still got the credential, or a fabric administrator, and you've got credentials to do that. And if you do the switching and teaming at that level, it allows you to do so much more. And it's at this point that you can add a new NAT object on that switch, which allows you to use that to allow external and internal access for the VM. Look at what receive-side scaling is, new VRSS, things like the data center bridging and the quality of service. There are questions. These are complicated things that you don't, unless this is your game and you play this game regularly, you'll look at them and go, oh, I really don't understand what that is. Just have a read of it, understand what they are, so that when you get the question, there might only be one, but when you get the question, you at least understand the terminology. There's nothing worse than getting a question up and going, wish I'd read that. I know I saw it on the page, but I didn't understand it. So just understand what it does. You don't have to understand the technology underpinning it. Look at SMB Direct and RDMA. Look at how you can now use switch embedded teams with RDMA switches, which you never used to be able to do. The fact that you can't configure multi-channel with only one network card. You need 2. Obvious, but you need 2. Virtual receive side scaling as well. Virtual machine queues and single root I/O virtualization. It's all about doing stuff on the network card rather than doing stuff in the processor. But it's what the stuff is that each one of those does and how it does it. And also where you configure it. So on a VM, where would you configure this stuff? Any guesses? I was going to plug my other machine in and show you. So you go to the VM, you go to settings, you go to the network card, and you notice a little plus by the network card. Click the plus, and there's advanced. There's 2 settings under that. All of this stuff and the new network stuff like router guard and the other guard, DHCP guard, are all in the advanced settings. And if you don't set them at the switch level and the network card level, you can't use them. These are all new improvements to the virtual switch, which are in that advanced area and more. Router guarding, DHCP guarding. You can use trunk mode, port mirroring. You can isolate in VLANs, all done in the advanced settings section, which, hey presto, is there. So you get hardware acceleration and advanced features. There's a small explanation there. You need to really go to docs.server.com and understand what they actually do. Software-defined networking. Buzzword, big buzzword, because we now have a new role. A new role is called network controller. Network controller can be highly available. You can stick it into a bunch of machines, and it will do all of the management of your data center firewall, your movement of virtual machines. It'll even do software load balancing, so it's got the new Azure load balancer built in. It's half of the Azure fabric built into this new software, this new server. And network controller is the one that does it. It's only available in Data Center Edition. Network controller is only available in Data Center Edition. The new network virtualization, so for software-defined networking and software-defined storage and building your data center, has evolved into VXLAN. The older version used NVGRE, which is Network Virtualization GUID Resource Encapsulation. So basically, you wrapped an envelope around to allow you to communicate with networks in the same host with the same networking. VXLAN is much more widely used. Just understand what VXLAN is and the differences between NVGRE and VXLAN. How would you implement the software load balancer? You will not have the kit to do this unless you work for a large organization that will give you lots of kit to do this. So read about it. There might be a TechNet lab on it. Understand how you would do it. In fact, there is a software-defined networking in the TechNet labs. So the software load balancer, or the software load balancer MUX, is a virtual machine. And that controls all of the load balancers. Each host then has an agent for the load balancer imported into it. And so the software load balancer can control, if you have an application that has part of it there, part of it there, and part of it there, and they're on different hosts, the software load balancer uses the software load balancer agents to understand where it distributes the information. It's essentially the same software load balancer as Azure uses. Let's go into network controller a bit. You can manage network controller with System Center or with PowerShell or with, if you're really clever, a RESTful application, what you wrote. So if you write an application, the API is published out there and you can write an application that will manage network controller. Currently, right now, if you're going to do it, it's going to be done through System Center. It does north, south, east, and west for firewall. It'll manage your network completely. And it can manage all of those things. It can manage the Hyper-V virtual machines and the switches, which is why we now use SET instead of internal teaming. It'll manage the physical network switches and the physical network routers and your firewall software. So we've placed a software version or software layer over the network to allow you to move things around without affecting those things. So it'll manage your current load balancers and your RAS as well. I'm not going to describe this. I've left it in because it's got a load of useful information for you. This is the one I want to show you. So the data center firewall will allow you to pick up a virtual machine which may have unique firewall properties inside that virtual machine, and it will allow you to move it to a completely different part of your network, and it will not breach any of the firewall policies. It will put those firewall policies on the new host for you. It's done with policies. You've got to write these policies. So imagine you have a large data center. You've got, over here, you've got application 1, which has got 10 virtual machines and a load of stuff connected to it. It's built beautifully. It's got multi-tier networking. It's fantastic. You know there's loads of maintenance going on. You're going to move it over here. Traditionally, that would normally mean man goes around with his cable and starts fiddling with things, and then you've got some Cisco work to do, and then you've got some firewall work to do, and then it eventually moves and nothing works because you haven't changed something internally. Here, you literally just go, move that there, point and click, and it will take everything with it and do it. It's what happens when you move a virtual machine in Azure effectively. So you can move your tenant virtual machines wherever you like. You don't break anything. A network controller sticks an agent in every virtual switch, so it knows what it's doing, where it is, and how it does it. It doesn't care what's going on in the VM at all. It doesn't even know what the guest is. It just says, this is a VM, I'm going to move it. It can be Linux, it can be whatever you want it to be. Doesn't matter. Yes, 5 minutes for questions. So, there's about 110 slides in the deck. You saw about 75. There's loads with links on, loads with help on. I think if I had one piece of advice, I would say create a OneNote, which is an awesome tool. Copy and paste all of your objective domains into the OneNote. Each objective domain goes in a different tab. And on that tab, build a number of pages that each time you read something in that objective domain, install DNS. Go through the process. Build it, install it, screenshot it, drop it into OneNote, do it with one click. And then write the notes that you want to study by. Because then, when things change, or when you haven't done it for a couple of weeks and you want to go back to it, you've got all of your resources, you've got links into docs.microsoft.com, and it's all in one place. Your learning resources. There's a course. It's 5 days. It's got 11, 12 modules. It goes through absolutely all of this, but if you're not the sort of person that likes sitting in one place for 5 days listening to the same bloke talk, it's not for you. It might be, you never know. It's also available as an online mock on demand as a video. The Born to Learn site. Does anybody use Born to Learn? One man. Well done. No, 2 men. Okay. That is the official Microsoft Learning help site. I actually moderate the Office 365 study group in. There are study groups where you can ask questions and ask for help. So if you're studying alone, you have no clue what's going on, try it. Might work. TechNet Virtual Labs, which I mentioned, there are hundreds of them. It's worthwhile using the search feature and doing quick search. There are 11 for 2016 at the moment. Things like DNS, things like DHCP, search for 12 as well because they haven't changed that much, and then just understand the differences. Virtual Academy, anybody use that? It's bite-size, it doesn't go really deep, but if it's a feature that you don't want to spend 20 hours learning and there's an MVA on it, it's worth having a look at. Matt McSpirit did a really good 10 reasons why you love Windows Server 2016 quite early on, about 12 months ago. It's worth having a look at because it gives you the 10 most important new things in Windows Server. And I actually found channel9.msdn.com is really useful, partly because every TechNet and every Ignite has all of the sessions posted there in the end, but also because you get loads of MVPs and loads of product team members deploy stuff. So as an example, if you want to understand more about NanoServer before it goes, there's a whole channel on NanoServer, and you can see, if you search for 80 cores on NanoServer, you can see a big 6U server with 80 cores, a terabyte of RAM running 3,000 nanoservers with more than half a terabyte of RAM free. So it just reinforces stuff for you.
What's NanoServer being replaced with? I'm sorry, say it again.
So you say it, I'll repeat it.
What is NanoServer being replaced with?
Okay, so the question is, what is NanoServer being replaced with? So yesterday we went through Server, Server Core, and NanoServer. Currently, NanoServer can be used for about 8 or 9 different roles. Post RS3, it can only be used for, it is only designed to be used for container host. If you don't upgrade your version of Windows, you can still use it. However, you wouldn't be licensed for NanoServer because NanoServer must be in what's called Current Branch for Business, and you must have SA to use it. So effectively, Microsoft is saying, don't use NanoServer for infrastructure. So Server Core, it's bigger, it's a little bit slower, but it's worked for 5 years as Server Core, and it will carry on working. What you won't have is a full server running DNS in 150 mega memory, which was really nice when I did that. Any other questions? Got 2 minutes. No, so we now have 3 options. We have server with a desktop experience, and we have server. The standard server is a GUI, is a non-GUI. It is the core, that's the default. NanoServer is another option you can install, but that goes away in, when RS3 comes out in the middle of October. It becomes only available for container hosts. So you can still use it, but you can't put DNS in it, and you can't put... Okay? Say again? Oh, you can't bare metal it either. You can't have it as a host, which was a real pain. But hey, we don't need it, do we? Just like server management tools, we don't need that. I spent weeks doing Nano Server. Thank you very much for coming, and good luck if you're taking the exam.
SMB V1 goes away in October.
RS3, the next version, SMB1 goes. And in Creators Update in October. So I'm assuming it'll come out when Creators Update Fall Edition comes out. SMB1 goes in that as well.
I've got a QNAP as well.
So I've got an old one and a new one. I had to buy the new one because the old ones are SMB. It's only 3 years old, SMB1 only. They're brilliant, but that really annoyed me. So that is now my Sonos QNAP, because Sonos is SMB1. I've VLANed my network at home. Sonos is on that VLAN with SMB1.